All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by. Welcome to another edition of Smart with Your Money Live. Today's edition, it's just me. My name is Felipe. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at the San Diego Financial Literacy Center, Debt Wave Credit Counseling. We may be joined by Chase Peckham as well. But for now, it's just me. And I love when I do presentations, especially on credit and everything. I do give examples the community college level and things on the dangers of sharing credit and that kind of thing. And I always preface it with, I'm gonna give you some solid financial advice when it comes to that. Maybe not the best dating advice, but at least your finances will be taken care of. So hopefully this is a little bit of both, and just kind of exploring the world of debt and dating. It's a real thing. I think anyone who's had debt and was dating can tell you, some horror stories, or maybe not. Maybe they were able to manage it successfully. So we'll get right to it. First of all, if we can get the PowerPoint, dating is expensive. In fact, depending on what data surveys you look at, Americans spend between $700 and $1,600 a year dating. That's a lot of money. Now, some people might be more successful at dating and they may get more dates. Some people might not be as successful, and you can save some money that way. I guess that's a budgeting tip. Try not to be so successful. But a quarter of daters will actually spend $100 or more on that first date. It's expensive. It's something that isn't getting any cheaper like everything else. So here we'll go over some of the things to look for as far as red flags. Also, some ideas that you might be able to incorporate to save yourself some money on dating, as well as where you live matters. The cost of living is different everywhere, and so is the cost of dating. It goes from about just under $300 in parts of New York to just under $40 in parts of South Dakota. Big difference there. It has a lot to do with where you live. Obviously, it's similar to everything else, the cost of living. If you stay somewhere near the coasts, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. In some of the bigger cities, it's going to be more expensive. Same offenders as usual. New York, New Jersey, California, Florida, Hawaii are looking at more expensive dating lives. And then some of the normal lower cost of living areas are going to be facing also the cheaper dates. So that actually got me thinking, what happens if someone moves and you move from, in this case, New York to South Dakota, and you have that expectation that maybe someone invites you on a date and you're waiting for like a New York City type of date, and you get a South Dakota type of date, whatever that happens to be. It might be a little bit of a letdown. And then you have it the other way when you leave, somewhere like South Dakota and you show up to New York City and you're like, how much am I supposed to spend? Or, man, this person is spoiling me. That was a lot of money for a date, when maybe it's just the norm in that part of the country. So where you live matters. Take that into account. Obviously, if you're going to be dating, the best thing you could do is put dating into your budget. It's something that I didn't do when I was in college. Well, one, because I didn't have a budget, but two, because it was not really, you don't really think about that. But if you're going to be out there dating, if you're in the dating pool, put it in the budget. If you're using an app or a paid service of any kind, to try and find those dates, that's a monthly expense potentially. Just getting ready to go to dates, if you have to dress up and look nice, get a haircut, get makeup, if you're paying for the dates, parts of the dates, it can be expensive. So incorporate it into your everyday budget. If you're unsuccessful that month and you don't find yourself a date, or you don't get asked out on a date, or you just decide, I don't want to deal with it this month, you can then save that money for next month, or maybe incorporate it into something else, increase your savings, increase your retirement, whatever it is. But at least you have that money set aside So when that attractive significant other comes over or attractive potential significant other comes over and says, hey, do you want to go on a date? You could say, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, let's do it. I have some money. You don't have to tell them, oh, I budgeted some money for you, thinking you might come and ask. But, you could just go ahead and, think that through and have that money aside so that financially you're ready when it happens. There's obviously a lot of other components to dating, but at least the financials, you have some money set aside so you can go on those dates, especially if you live somewhere where it's going to be a bigger chunk of change. Can money get you a second date? Yes. I was going to try and sugarcoat it, but really, it's not always the case. But the difference, whether someone paid for the date or how much the date paid for, or a combination of the two, can influence the likelihood of someone going out on a second date. Now, and it also matters on how much the individual is making. So if you're dating someone who has a higher income, they're more likely to take into account whether or not you paid for the date, or whether or not how much you paid, or both. And it's a significant jump in if you paid or didn't pay, or where you went, on whether or not you get a date. I asked a couple people, like, back in your dating days, did the money influence your decision on whether or not to go on a second date? And I got a grab bag, a mix of responses. So it's going to be different for everyone. I got someone said no, except for the time the person said you can get anything from the value menu. That was a little bit too far, a little bit too much of an outlier to warrant a second date. But it's something where if you're pretty much on average, you're gonna be okay. If you made the right financial decision and selected a date that fits your budget, that fits your lifestyle, that is what you're comfortable with, and you're not able to get a second date because of it, maybe it just wasn't meant to be. Because if you have to reach for that first date and you have to reach for every date, that's going to cause a situation where you might put yourself in debt just to continue to reach for that next date and to overspend. So do what's comfortable for you. Maybe you go just a little over if you're trying to impress, but do what's right for your financial situation. And when the right person comes around financially, you guys might match, and there you go. You guys can both be happy. If you're all constantly reaching for a higher than what you can afford type of scenario, eventually that can turn into relationship problems down the road when you can't afford that, or when that debt becomes such a burden that you have to take a step back and say, okay, I can't do this anymore, or I need to take care of this debt, or whatever the case may be. So, don't be honest. And if they have a significantly higher income, and you're don't try and keep up, because if that doesn't work out in the long run, that could be a big financial burden that falls then back on you. So, and if you go on a date and the other person, didn't quite take you to a place that meets your standards, if everything else was great, maybe you do give them a chance for a second try. Maybe they didn't even realize it. Maybe, have a conversation. Maybe you plan the next one and then see where that goes. But, maybe it wasn't payday Friday. That was last Friday type of thing. So, keep an open mind, but don't stretch your finances to try and get to that next level, because at some point, if that relationship continues, it's going to pop its head back out and it's like, wait, you mean you can't afford what we've been doing for the last 2 years? And that can cause stress in the relationship. And that could ultimately mean the relationship will dissolve for whatever reason. So stay true to yourself, stay true to your budget the best you can. So when to talk about money, and this was an interesting study. I was reading the Debt Wave blog on the topic, and I have a link for it at the end. And I saw this chart, and it got me thinking, when do you talk about money? And it varies from person to person. I couldn't believe that 2% of people said once you were engaged, please, please, please talk about money before you go getting engaged. That's a big one. But the majority, said it's a close majority, but the majority said once in a serious relationship, which then, in my opinion, that's still a little later than you would ideally want. I mean, you don't want to go into the first date saying, hey, this is my credit score. What's your credit score? That could be a little bit of a turnoff. That would be like saying, hey, what do you want to name our first daughter? It might be a little scary for a potential dater to look over and like, you want my credit score? But you can talk finances without making it a financial topic. Maybe you say, what do you like to do on your free time? Where do you normally like to go eat? And if they say, some high-end restaurants that they usually eat at, then maybe you expect to budget a little bit more. If they say, oh, you know what, I like doing picnics at the park, or I'll eat wherever, it doesn't matter. You can kind of make assumptions, and it's bad to assume things, but on that first date, you can kind of start to get an idea of how they are financially. And please don't wait until you're engaged, though. And I would say probably before you're in a serious relationship. I like the after dating consistently. That seems reasonable. But I think after a few dates is probably the sweet spot I would recommend. So, it varies. Chase, do you think it would be wise to ask about money or talk about money on a first date?
No, I don't. I don't think that there's a multiple levels of dating where that should eventually come in. That's definitely not a starting point.
It may result in a lot of no second dates if you lead with the personal finances. As much as I like budgeting and credit, I think if I were dating and someone came up and said that, I'd be like, whoa, wait a minute, we just met. So it's going to be different comfort levels for everyone. So when you're dating, we've heard the statistics with relationships and divorces and how finances can cause a lot of that and the stress before you even get there. You at some point dated. There are cases where there are money warning signs that you could pick up in the early dating stages that can save you some heartache, some heartbreak, and potentially some financial struggles at some point down the road. So these are just a few of them. What are some of the money warning signs to look out for? Maybe they're a little bit of a red flag where you can just kind of take a step back and analyze the situation, which is hard. It's always harder to, as a third person looking in, it's easier to see those flaws than when you're in there. You got the endorphins, you got that love feeling, you got that, yay, oh, this is the best thing ever feeling, especially in the early part of relationships. And, maybe you don't pick up on them, but here's some things to keep an eye out for that can be problems down the road. If they have debt with no plan, if they have even worse debt that they're not paying, that could be a red flag for you. That might be hard to, you start seeing past due bills, or they, hey, oh, I couldn't text you, forgot to pay my cell phone bill, or something like that. You miss your cell phone bill payment today, they're not going to shut it off tomorrow. That means that bill has been past due much longer. And it could be they're going through a rough patch, but if they should be able to communicate if that's the case and say, you know what, I'm in over my head. And obviously every debt's going to be different, especially if you're young, you got those student loans hanging out in the background, that's possible. They may have $20,000, $30,000 worth of debt, or $60,000 or $70,000 worth of debt. But if they have a plan to take care of it, if that debt is like student loans or something like that, it's a different situation than, I got $15,000 worth of credit card debt and I'm sort of on time with the payments. That could be a red flag for finances going forward if that's the case.
Sometimes you just get thrown into that situation too, where, my own experience when I was dating my wife, Carrie, we'd been dating maybe a month, and her mom was supposed to go to Hawaii with her, didn't. And she invited me to go. And I'm like, oh, here we go. And I had to explain to her that I was in the middle of paying back some credit card debt that I got myself into when I was young. So I couldn't go. And, I was expecting her to run for the hills. Because who wants to date somebody when at the time she was 24 years old? And, doing well for herself. And why do I want to date somebody who has this much debt? And yet for just the opposite happened. She basically offered me to ask me to go anyway, and that she would pay for it. And she felt like that if I could be honest like that in such a vulnerable spot, it's not easy to talk about money like that. It's embarrassing. It's all of those emotions. And she's like, if you're going to be honest with me at this point in our relationship about something like that, then it makes me feel pretty good about where we would be, down the road. And she was right, because we've always had that open communication. And on the opposite end, I had a really good friend who was engaged to be married, asked her, and 6 months into their engagement, asked her if, her thoughts on if he, should do bankruptcy or how he should handle debt. And needless to say, she broke off the engagement. So
the plan makes a big difference then.
Totally.
Because if you had gone up to her and said, you know what, I can't, my credit cards are maxed out, I'm just trying to figure out how to make the next payment.
Yeah.
Then she probably does run for the hills, even if you were honest. If you're just saying, I got credit cards, but I'm.
And honestly, if she did run for the hills, it was meant to be.
Right.
It was meant to be that she bailed, and we weren't meant to be together because we didn't fit together at that stage in our life. Exactly. It just so happened that for whatever that I struck a chord with her in that way. And, needless to say, but if she'd have gone the other way, which many, many, many women did, then, but the right one came along. And I firmly believe that, what's meant to be will be. Yeah,
absolutely. Another one, another red warning flag is uncontrolled spending. If their income can keep up with it, that's a different story, potentially. But what happens if that changes? What happens if, you'd rather save to go on a vacation, you'd rather save. So uncontrolled spending, where it's just buy stuff, and not singing here. But it's something where they're purchasing over and over and over, and maybe they don't have the income to back it up. That's definitely something where that could be a little bit of a red flag.
Or maybe that's just something against what you believe in, whether they have the money or not. You have a hard time with that, then that's a problem. Because even if she does have the money, when you're together later, or he, absolutely, it could be just, even if you're affording it, that's still going to bother you. So that's still something personality wise that you need to figure out. I mean, your plan is to spend the rest of your life with somebody eventually, right? That's why we date. Well, some of us, most of us, eventually that's going to get there. And it fits right with different money goals.
Absolutely. Yeah, you may just have different priorities, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. People view money differently, and both people can be doing well financially, but just have different goals. Maybe someone wants to buy a house and be a homeowner, and the other person doesn't want to deal with that. Maybe one person wants to save money so they can travel, and the other person just wants to, spend money on stuff around town or eating out or whatever it is. So at some point in the relationship, when you start talking money goals, if they don't match up, there could be some potential problems there. It would be like, hey, do you want kids? Absolutely not. And the other person's like, oh, I can't wait to have 5. There are some differences that you can live with, and then there are some differences that may cause problems at some point down the road.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some people that love to go out and will spend hundreds of dollars on steak, or, the high-end food. And you may not have that taste. And right. You may think it's ridiculous to spend that kind of money on that kind of food. Whether they can afford it or not, or whether it's kind of irrelevant, it's do you have those same views? Right. And that if you're going to live with the person, your goal is to do that, you're going to know you're going to know pretty quick that regardless of the money, I don't feel comfortable with that. So that's going to be a hard match.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if they start lying to you about money, well, you don't want to get to the point where they're just hiding Amazon packages from you at some point down the road once you're living together. But if there starts to be lies about money, whatever the lies happen to be, and I guess there's different types. You can lie by omitting, or you can actively lie. So pick your decision making there. But it's something where If there's lies taking place when you're dating, are those lies going to continue? Will that lead to financial infidelity down the road? Will that lead to financial stress for both of you down the road, where maybe that relationship just wasn't going to work out? So I was looking for, there's like a million of these types of pictures where it's like hide packages, or hide packages from wife, hide packages from husband. And there's some really creative Amazon people out there who apparently like hide it in leaves and all kinds of cool stuff. But I just thought this one was funny because it obviously doesn't fit there.
It is a funny joke.
Yeah, I didn't have a GIF or image for this one because they were all going to get me in trouble. Always looking for you to pay. If the other person's always just expecting that you will pay, or you pick this one up, or yeah, I'll get you next time, but that next time never comes, have it be something where, maybe you have a conversation and you figure out what those expectations are. If they're going through a hard patch and maybe they're going to recover from it and eventually they're going to, start picking up the tab or whatever it is, or maybe they just expect for you to pay for everything going forward, and is that okay with you? Is that fair? Probably not. But if they're always looking for you to pay, that could be a red flag as well.
We have that even with friends, slow wallets.
Right.
If there's slow wallets, or there's the people when you all go out and they want to break it all down, and they well, I only paid for this and this, and we got to break it into 18 different checks, and yeah, it'll be very, very rare that we invite those people back.
Right. It becomes different and it becomes difficult, so do you really want to go and continue with that kind of a date? All right. So, I was supposed to have this one coming in two pieces, but it didn't. The image behind this was a hot dog cut up to make it look like an octopus, but it was supposed to come in before the Lady and the Tramp. Some budget date ideas, and a joke that fell flat. So here are some budget ideas so you can go on a date on a budget, which was like the best slide in the presentation, now ruined because the animations came in at the same time. But here we go. Video before in real life. It's a thing, and 2020 introduced this, or made it a far more prominent thing, and you do like a pre-date. Instead of going out to dinner and talking to this person for the first time, you sit down and you have a Zoom or a whatever kind of video conferencing thing you want to do, and you have a date at home while they're at home. And it was a new increased in popularity 2020 type of thing, but it could save you money because you don't have to spend money on that first date if it falls flat. I think
you can also, right, and whether you get butterflies from that person or not,
right? If
it's an interesting conversation.
Exactly.
There's
not
get to
does
he expect me to go home that
without
night
spending any money? Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it's actually kind of a clever idea, because I think we've all been on dates where after that first one, you're like, oh, there's definitely not being a second one. But it's now you don't have to spend money on it. You don't even have to get ready for it that much. Just set up a Zoom and, see where it goes, and see if that could save you some money that way. Hiking.
And if it's not going well, you just say, hey, our 40 minutes are almost up. We're going to get kicked out.
Right. Yeah. Oh, my internet is dropping, and then bloop. Hiking, because I haven't added it to a presentation in a long time, and because it fits. It's got to be the right person, though, because if you ask the wrong person hiking, there may not be a second date. I learned that as well the hard way many years ago. So make sure that if you're doing an outdoorsy, budget-friendly plan, make sure that that's something that this person might also enjoy. But if they do, go on a hike. It's pretty cool. It's fun. It's free. And you might get a really good first date picture for Instagram. Movie night in. Of course, those are root beers. You get a movie. You have a streaming service like a Netflix, Hulu, Amazon.
Oh, I love that movie.
All that stuff. Watch a movie. Make them watch your favorite movie. Maybe that might be a compatibility thing. It doesn't have to be maybe not a first date. Hey, you want to go on a date? Yeah. Where do you want to go? Well, I have Netflix. That might not go very well, but on future dates, maybe you just save some money, hang out, one of you cooks dinner, or you order a pizza, or whatever the case may be. but you already pay for the streaming service. Maybe take advantage of it. You can even do this like a group date where if you have lots of friends and they all want to go hang out, maybe instead of doing a double or triple date or whatever, let's all do a movie night at someone's house. Stargazing, depending on where you live, can't do this in a big city, but if you can find a place where it's not so lit up by the stores of the world, it can be free. It can be somewhat romantic, I guess. And if it's not super cold like most of the country is right now, it could actually be kind of fun. And it's free.
Aren't you a romantic softie?
I try. Of course, I would have picked hiking, but
is this like third date, or I mean, this isn't first date material?
I don't know that it's first date material.
Heck no, it's not first date material.
Unless you happen to know that they're really into stars or something.
And they're both astrologists.
Oh, the heck, that would be interesting.
Or really into their signs.
Yeah, I guess. No, probably not a first date idea, but it is a good one to mix in here and there with the going out to eats that may save you some money at some point down the road. And continuing on that softie, long walks on the beach. People like to say they like long walks on the beach. It's kind of a joke. If you have a beach next to you, go walk on it. That's not a bad date idea. It's free. If you don't have a beach, find a river or a lake or just a field somewhere and go for a walk. Maybe just an urban walk. And you walk around downtown or wherever it is, and and save some money that way.
Yep.
Go out on a walk.
If you're in a big urban area, those big parks are awesome.
You also have, if you want to. What was that?
I said, if you live in an urban area, I mean, like San Francisco's got Golden Gate Park, and then obviously New York City's got Central Park. I mean, those places are incredible. They're awesome.
Oh yeah. Right. I missed most of it, but I heard Central Park. So I'm guessing you said like Balboa, Central Park, Stanley Park in Vancouver is pretty sweet.
Golden Gate Park in San Francisco.
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to keep learning, you want to read more about it, see some of those charts again that I borrowed. The Debt Wave blog has debt-free dating. It's a blog. It's got a lot more info. And we also have our most popular Talk Wealth to Me episode, which is timely. It's about dating and Valentine's Day more specifically. Roses are red, violets are blue. Valentine's on a budget is sweet too. That's a podcast. Speaking of podcasts, you can continue learning at any time. Talk Wealth to Me. Find it wherever you find your other favorite podcasts or on our website. And thanks for joining, everybody. Appreciate it. Join us 2 weeks from now in case it didn't work out and you just decided I'm done dating. That was too much work and I'm just going to be single. Tips for managing your money as a single person. We did that one after Valentine's Day in case it's just you took too many of our dating advices and you ended up single. You might have to come back for this one. Thank you, everybody. And thanks for stopping by. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one.